The crystalline spires of Luminara City pierced the violet sky, their surfaces refracting the light of 3 moons into rainbow cascades. Naira Valari stood at the window of her laboratory, her silver eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the last traces of sunset painted the clouds in shades of amber and rose. Her reflection in the glass showed what most would consider the epitome of Zephyrian beauty, tall, willowy, with iridescent skin that shifted between pale blue and lavender, and hair that seemed to capture starlight. Behind her, holographic displays filled the air with streams of genetic data, each one representing another failed attempt at conception among her people. The Zephyrian race was dying, not from war or disease, but from their own genetic perfection. Their bodies had become so selective that finding compatible mates had become nearly impossible. Naira's fingers traced the cool glass as she watched a human diplomatic shuttle descend through the atmosphere, its hull gleaming in the fading light. The arrival of Earth's representatives had sparked both hope and controversy among her people. Some saw potential trade partners, others feared contamination of their carefully curated genetic lineage. Dr. Valari, her assistant's voice came through the comm system. The human delegation has requested your presence at tomorrow's medical exchange. They're particularly interested in your research on genetic compatibility. Naira's lips curved into a subtle smile. Confirm my attendance, Terran. Perhaps our visitors will provide fresh perspectives on our situation. The next morning, Naira found herself in the Grand Exchange Hall, surrounded by both human and Zephyrian scientists. Her attention, however, was drawn to one particular human, James Harrison, the delegation's scientific advisor. Unlike his colleagues who seemed uncomfortable in Luminara's higher gravity, he moved with natural grace. Your genetic selection process is fascinating, James said, approaching her display. Though I can't help but wonder if such rigid criteria might be part of the problem rather than the solution. Naira raised an elegant eyebrow. A bold statement, Mr. Harrison. Our genetic refinement is what made us who we are. And what's killing you now, he replied softly, his brown eyes meeting hers without fear. Evolution thrives on adaptation, on diversity. Perfect stability is just another word for stagnation. Before she could respond, her personal scanner chimed, a habit she developed of analyzing the genetic structures of those around her. What she saw in James's readout made her breath catch. His genetic structure was unlike anything she'd encountered, adaptable, resilient, with markers that suggested incredible potential for genetic compatibility. Is everything all right? James asked, noticing her sudden intensity. Would you be willing to participate in a more detailed study? Naira found herself asking, her scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. Your genetic structure shows some unusual properties. James smiled, a warm expression that sparked something unexpected in Naira's typically controlled emotions. I thought your people considered human genetics inferior. Perhaps we need to reevaluate our assumptions, she replied, leading him toward her private laboratory. The corridors of the research center hummed with subtle energy as they walked, their footsteps echoing on the crystal-infused floors. In her lab, Naira initiated a deep genetic scan, watching in amazement as James's DNA structure revealed itself in the holographic display. This is remarkable, she breathed, her fingers dancing through the projection. Your genetic code shows signs of recent evolutionary adaptation, changes that would take our people centuries to develop naturally. Human history is full of adaptation, James explained, watching her work with obvious fascination. We've survived ice ages, plagues, countless environmental changes. It's in our nature to adapt. While we pursued genetic purity, Naira murmured, your species embraced change. She paused, considering the implications. Would you consent to a compatibility test? It's completely non-invasive. James studied her for a moment, understanding dawning in his eyes. You think human DNA might be compatible with Zephyrian genetics? I think your DNA specifically shows markers that could revolutionize our understanding of genetic compatibility, she corrected, trying to maintain scientific detachment despite the growing excitement in her chest. The test results appeared in a cascade of holographic data, and Naira felt her heart skip a beat. James's genetic structure wasn't just compatible, it was perfect. His adaptable DNA could potentially bypass the rigid selection criteria that had been condemning her people to extinction. This could change everything, she whispered, but as she turned to share her discovery, she found James standing much closer than expected. The air between them seemed to crackle with possibility. Sometimes, he said softly, the best solutions come from the most unexpected places. As their eyes met, Naira realized they stood on the brink of something that would either save her people or tear their carefully ordered society apart. And somehow, she couldn't bring herself to care which. The news of Naira's pregnancy spread through Luminara City like wildfire. What should have been impossible had become reality. A Zephyrian female's body had not only accepted but embraced human genetic material. In the privacy of her medical suite, Naira watched Dr. Laren Theus examine the holographic display of her developing child. The genetic fusion is extraordinary, Laren murmured, her silver-flecked hands moving through the projection. Human adaptability combined with Zephyrian precision, I've never seen anything like it. James stood nearby, his presence both comforting and dangerous. The diplomatic mission that brought him to Luminara had been extended indefinitely, officially to facilitate ongoing scientific exchange. Unofficially, he hadn't left Naira's side since their discovery. The High Council has requested a full report, Laren continued, her tone carrying a note of warning. They're particularly interested in how this pregnancy bypassed our genetic barriers. You mean they want to know how I contaminated our precious bloodline, Naira replied, her hand instinctively moving to her abdomen where a subtle luminescence had begun to show through her skin, a traditional sign of Zephyrian pregnancy. They're afraid, James observed, moving closer to Naira. This challenges everything they've built their society around. The medical suite's crystal walls pulsed with soft light, responding to the elevated emotions in the room. Laren's expression softened as she looked at the couple. You're not the only ones, you know. Since word got out, I've had 7 other Zephyrian females inquire about human genetic compatibility. Naira's eyes widened. 7. All from prestigious bloodlines, all previously unable to conceive due to genetic rejection. Laren's lips curved into a subtle smile. Your discovery has given them hope. Their discussion was interrupted by a priority alert. Council leader Daxon Vrel's holographic form materialized in the center of the room, his traditional robes flowing around his tall frame. Dr. Valari, your presence is required at an emergency session of the High Council. Now. Naira challenged, gesturing to the medical equipment surrounding her. Especially now. Daxon's silver eyes shifted to James, narrowing slightly. This matter concerns the future of our species. The council chamber was a marvel of Zephyrian architecture, its crystalline dome capturing and amplifying the light of the 3 moons. Naira stood before the assembled council members, feeling their judgment weigh heavily upon her. James had been forbidden from entering, this was a matter for pure Zephyrians only. You understand the gravity of your situation, Daxon began, his voice echoing in the chamber. For generations, we have carefully guided our species' evolution, selecting for perfection in every genetic pairing. And watching our population decline with each generation, Naira countered. How many of our females can no longer conceive because their bodies reject every potential match? Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Another council member, her skin shimmering with age, leaned forward. And you suggest we should dilute our bloodlines with human genetics? I suggest we should survive. Naira activated a holographic display, showing the genetic structure of her unborn child. Look at these markers, human adaptability hasn't weakened our genetics, it strengthened them. The child carries all our enhanced traits plus newfound genetic flexibility. An aberration, Daxon declared, but Naira noticed several council members studying the display with poorly concealed interest. A solution, she corrected. One that's already proving reproducible. Dr. Theus has identified multiple other potential matches between our species. The chamber erupted in chaos. Some council members rose in outrage, while others leaned in, fascinated by the implications. Daxon's voice cut through the noise. This discussion is premature. Dr. Valari's pregnancy must be thoroughly studied before we consider any broader implications. You mean contained, Naira realized, taking a step back. You want to control this discovery. We want to protect our people, Daxon replied smoothly. Surely you understand the need for caution. Your pregnancy will be monitored in a secure facility, away from potentially disruptive influences. You mean away from James? The crystals in the chamber walls pulsed red with Naira's anger. I won't be imprisoned for bringing hope to our people. Not imprisoned, Daxon corrected. Protected. Guards. But Naira was already moving. Her research hadn't just been theoretical, she'd studied human genetic adaptability extensively. Now, she triggered changes in her own body that her ancestors would have considered heretical, increasing her speed and strength beyond normal Zephyrian limits. She was through the chamber doors before the guards could react, her feet barely touching the crystal floors as she ran. James was waiting where she'd told him to be, understanding the probability of this outcome before she'd even entered the chamber. The underground resistance, he asked as they hurried through the lesser-used corridors of the complex. Riva Solari has a safe house prepared, Naira confirmed. We're not the only ones who believe our future lies in adaptation rather than isolation. As they emerged into the violet night, the three moons casting overlapping shadows across the crystal city, Naira felt her child's luminescence pulse in response to her elevated heart rate. She placed a hand over the glow, making a silent promise. Their child wouldn't just be a scientific breakthrough, it would be the beginning of a revolution. Deep beneath Luminara City's gleaming spires, the ancient crystal caves held secrets older than Zephyrian civilization. Now they sheltered a different kind of secret, a growing movement of genetic rebels. Riva Solari's underground sanctuary had become a haven for those who dared to challenge the High Council's definition of genetic purity. Naira watched from a crystalline observation platform as more refugees arrived, each with a similar story. Zephyrian females whose bodies had rejected all traditional matches, scientists who had questioned the dogma of genetic isolation, and even a few sympathetic males who had seen their sisters and daughters suffer under the weight of genetic perfection. 3 more safe houses established in the northern quarter, James reported, joining her at the railing. The weeks in hiding had changed him, adding a hardness to his features while deepening the connection between them. Riva's network is growing faster than the council can track it. Below them, Dr. Laren Theus had set up a makeshift medical bay in one of the larger caverns. The crystal formations naturally amplified her diagnostic equipment, allowing her to confirm what many had already suspected: Naira wasn't the only one carrying a hybrid child anymore. How many now? Naira asked, though she already knew the answer. 15 confirmed pregnancies, Laren called up, her voice echoing off the crystal walls. All showing the same enhanced genetic markers as yours. The human DNA isn't just compatible, it's actively improving Zephyrian genetic stability. The cave system pulsed with bioluminescence, responding to the collective emotions of its inhabitants. Hope, fear, determination, all reflected in the shifting colors of the ancient crystals. Riva Solari emerged from one of the tunnels, her traditional council robes replaced with more practical attire that didn't hamper movement through the narrow passages. The council is getting desperate, she announced, joining them on the platform. They've implemented mandatory genetic screening at all major transportation hubs. Anyone showing signs of genetic contamination is being detained. They can't stop what's already begun, James observed, his hand finding Naira's. Her pregnancy had progressed significantly, the luminescence beneath her skin now bright enough to cast shadows in the dim cave. No, but they can make examples of those they catch. Riva's expression darkened. 2 of our safe houses in the Eastern District were raided last night. Daxon is calling it a genetic quarantine for the public's safety. A commotion at the cave entrance drew their attention. A group of newcomers was arriving, led by an unexpected figure, Council Member Vera Tan, one of the eldest and most respected geneticists in Luminara City. "My own granddaughter," Vera announced to the stunned crowd, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of wisdom, "has suffered through 12 genetic rejections. When I saw your child's genetic scans, Dr. Valari, I knew we had been wrong. Our pursuit of perfection has become a path to extinction." The cave crystals pulsed with renewed energy as Vera shared the data she'd brought, detailed genetic analyses proving that the hybrid pregnancies weren't just viable, they were producing a new and more robust genetic line. The human capacity for adaptation, when combined with Zephyrian genetic precision, created something greater than either species alone. "The Council's control is built on fear," Vera continued, her silver eyes reflecting the crystal light. "Fear of change, fear of imperfection. But true perfection lies in adaptation, in the ability to grow and evolve." As if in response to her words, Naira felt a sudden shift within her. The luminescence of her pregnancy flared brightly, causing the surrounding crystals to resonate in harmony. Dr. Laren rushed forward with her scanning equipment, her eyes widening at the readings. "The child's genetic structure is still evolving," she announced, wonder in her voice. "Each new adaptation is more stable than the last. It's as if the combination of our species' DNA has unlocked potential neither of us knew we had." "That's what they're afraid of," James realized. "Not that will weaken your species, but that will change it into something beyond their control." The moment was interrupted by urgent news from one of Riva's scouts. The Council had deployed advanced scanning satellites, using the city's crystal network to search for unauthorized genetic signatures. Their hidden sanctuary wouldn't stay hidden for long. "We need to move," Riva decided, already mobilizing her people. "The southern caves connect to the old transit tunnels. We can evacuate everyone to the outer settlements." But Naira stood her ground, the glow of her pregnancy illuminating her resolved expression. "No. We've been hiding long enough. Look around you, we're not just a handful of rebels anymore. We're a movement. And movements don't survive by running." "What are you suggesting?" Vera asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "We take our case public," Naira declared. "Not just to our people, but to Earth as well. The Council wants to paint this as a contamination, a crisis. Let's show everyone it's actually salvation." The crystals surged with color as the assembled crowd responded to her words. In that moment, surrounded by the combined light of ancient crystals and new hope, they could all see it, a future where strength came from unity rather than isolation, where perfection meant adaptation rather than stagnation. "They'll try to stop us," Riva warned, though she was already smiling. "Let them try," James replied, standing beside Naira. "Some changes can't be contained, no matter how hard you try to preserve the old way." As if in agreement, the unborn child's luminescence pulsed once more, its light reflecting off the crystal walls until the entire cavern glowed with the promise of evolution's next step. The grand broadcasting center of Luminara City rose like a crystalline beacon against the violet sky, its transmission spires designed to reach every corner of Zephyrian civilization. Now, those same spires had become the focal point of a revolution. Naira stood at the heart of their makeshift command center in the underground levels, surrounded by both technology and determination. The Council's security forces are concentrated around the main entrance, Riva reported, manipulating a holographic map of the building. But they haven't discovered the maintenance tunnels that connect to the old crystal mining network. James studied the display, his military training from Earth showing in his tactical assessment. "We'll need to split their attention. A direct confrontation at the main entrance while smaller teams move through the tunnels." "I've compiled all the genetic data," Dr. Laren announced, holding up a crystal data core that pulsed with stored information. "Complete analysis of all 15 hybrid pregnancies, including comparative studies showing the evolutionary advantages. Once this reaches the public, there'll be no going back. Naira's hand rested on her swollen abdomen, where the luminescence had grown so bright it was visible even through her protective clothing. The Council has controlled information for too long, deciding what our people should know about their own biology. It's time they saw the truth. Elder Vera, who had become one of their strongest allies, stepped forward. I've contacted other Council members who have privately expressed doubts about our genetic isolation. When the broadcast begins, they'll move to formally challenge Daxon's leadership. The plan was set in motion as twilight approached. The resistance movement had grown far beyond their initial numbers, now including hundreds of Zephyrians who had seen the promise of genetic diversity firsthand. The main force, led by Riva, began their approach toward the broadcast center's primary entrance. Meanwhile, Naira, James, and a small team navigated the crystalline maintenance tunnels, their way illuminated by both the natural bioluminescence of the crystals and the steady glow of Naira's pregnancy. Dr. Laren accompanied them, monitoring Naira's condition with increasing concern. The child's genetic activity is intensifying, she whispered as they paused at a junction. The stress of the situation is accelerating development. We don't have a choice, Naira replied, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. This has to end now, before the Council can suppress the truth entirely. They emerged into the broadcast center's lower levels just as Riva's distraction began. Above them, they could hear the chaos of the confrontation between resistance members and Council forces. The building's crystal structure hummed with tension, reflecting the conflict playing out within its walls. Their small team had nearly reached the main broadcasting hub when they encountered their first real opposition. Council leader Daxon himself stood waiting with a squad of elite guards, his expression a mixture of anger and what might have been fear. I should have known you'd try something like this, he said, his voice echoing in the crystalline chamber. Always the brilliant rebel, Naira, never content with the perfection we achieved. Perfection? Naira challenged, stepping forward despite James's protective gesture. Look around you, Daxon. Our population dwindles with each generation. Our bodies reject viable mates because we've engineered ourselves into an evolutionary dead end. Is that your idea of perfection? Better extinction than contamination, Daxon spat, but there was uncertainty in his eyes as he looked at the obvious evidence of Naira's successful pregnancy. We are the pinnacle of evolution. Evolution doesn't have a pinnacle, James interjected, moving to stand beside Naira. It's a continuous process of adaptation and change. The moment you try to freeze it, to maintain some artificial idea of perfection, you've already failed. The confrontation was interrupted by a sudden surge of power through the building's crystal matrix. Elder Vera had succeeded, their allies on the Council had initiated an emergency broadcast override. Every screen and holographic projector in the city would soon be active, ready to receive their transmission. It's over, Daxon, Naira declared, the luminescence of her pregnancy seeming to pulse in time with the building's energy. Our people deserve to know the truth. All of it. But Daxon's expression had turned dangerous. If I can't protect our genetic purity through law, he raised a weapon that hummed with deadly energy, then I'll protect it through more direct means. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Daxon fired, the energy beam cutting through the air toward Naira. James moved without thinking, pushing her aside, but the blast caught him in the shoulder, sending him spinning to the ground. The crystals around them flared with crimson light, responding to the violence. And then, something unprecedented occurred. The luminescence of Naira's pregnancy suddenly intensified, becoming almost blindingly bright. A wave of energy pulsed outward from her body, interfacing with the crystal architecture of the building itself. Every screen, every holographic projector, every communication device in range activated simultaneously. Through their link with the crystal technology, Naira's child was broadcasting its own genetic structure, showing in real time the beautiful complexity of human and Zephyrian DNA working in perfect harmony. The evidence was undeniable, unavoidable, and being transmitted across the entire city. Daxon stood frozen, his weapon forgotten as he stared at the displays surrounding them. In every direction, the future of his species was being revealed, not in the static perfection he had championed, but in the dynamic adaptation that came from embracing change. The revolution had begun, not with violence, but with truth. 1 month after the broadcast that changed everything, the crystal spires of Luminara City shimmered with new purpose. The great assembly hall, once reserved for council meetings, now hosted representatives from both Zephyrian and human worlds. The walls pulsed with a harmony of colors, reflecting the unprecedented gathering within. Naira stood at the center of it all, her newborn daughter cradled in her arms. The child, named Aurora to honor both her human heritage and the dawn of a new era, gleamed with a luminescence never before seen in their species. Her skin shifted between human and Zephyrian tones, displaying a genetic flexibility that had already revolutionized their understanding of evolution. "The genetic scans are remarkable," Dr. Laren announced to the assembled delegates, her holographic displays showing the intricate dance of DNA. Aurora's genetic structure combines the best of both species, Zephyrian precision and human adaptability. But more than that, she represents an entirely new evolutionary path. James stood beside them, his shoulder still healing from Daxon's attack, but his eyes bright with pride and wonder. The former council leader himself sat in the audience, now under house arrest but required to witness the fruits of the change he had fought so hard to prevent. Elder Vera, who had been elected as interim leader during the transition, stepped forward. "For generations, we believed that genetic purity was our greatest strength. We were wrong. In our quest for perfection, we nearly engineered our own extinction. But through this child, and the others like her, we have discovered a profound truth: true strength lies in diversity." The evidence was undeniable. In the month since the broadcast, medical centers across the city had been overwhelmed with Zephyrians seeking genetic compatibility testing with human volunteers. Each successful pairing proved what Naira and James had discovered: their species weren't just compatible, they were complementary. Riva, now heading the new Genetic Diversity Initiative, shared the latest statistics. "We've documented over 200 successful pregnancies, each showing the same enhanced genetic markers as Aurora. The genetic rejection syndrome that plagued our females is becoming a thing of the past. But more importantly, we're seeing unprecedented adaptability in the hybrid genetic structures." Dr. Laren stepped forward, adding to the presentation. "The children aren't just surviving, they're thriving. Their genetic flexibility allows them to adapt to environmental changes that would challenge either species alone. They represent the next step in both human and Zephyrian evolution." The assembly hall hummed with excitement as delegates from both worlds discussed the implications. What had begun as a crisis was transforming into an opportunity for both species to grow beyond their limitations. "There will be challenges ahead," Naira addressed the gathering, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "Change never comes easily, especially to a society built on tradition. But look around you, look at what we can achieve when we stop fearing difference and start embracing it." Aurora stirred in her arms, her tiny hands reaching up to touch her mother's face. Where their skin met, both of their natural luminescence synchronized, creating patterns of light that danced across their skin. The sight drew gasps of wonder from the assembled delegates. James wrapped an arm around them both, and Aurora's glow responded to his presence too, despite his human genetics. Or perhaps because of them. "She's proof that we're stronger together," he said, his voice carrying to the farthest corners of the hall. "Not just our daughter, but what she represents, the power of choosing adaptation over isolation, growth over stagnation." Elder Vera rose to make the formal announcement they had all been waiting for. "The High Council, in its new form, has voted unanimously to establish permanent genetic exchange programs with Earth. Our future lies not in maintaining what we were, but in discovering what we can become together." The crystal walls of the assembly hall erupted in a symphony of color, responding to the surge of hope and excitement that filled the room. Delegates from both worlds stood, applauding the dawn of a new era of cooperation and growth. Later that evening, Naira and James stood on their balcony overlooking the city, Aurora sleeping peacefully in her specialized cradle. The 3 moons of their world cast overlapping shadows across the crystal spires, creating a tapestry of light and shadow that seemed to mirror their journey. Was it worth it? James asked softly, watching their daughter's gentle glow pulse in time with her dreams. All the risk, the conflict, the change. Naira looked out at her city, now transformed not just by the physical presence of humans but by a fundamental shift in how her people saw themselves and their place in the universe. The old crystal towers still stood, but they shimmered with new purpose, their light mixing with modern human architecture in ways that enhanced both. "Look at her," Naira replied, touching Aurora's cheek gently. "She's not just our daughter, she's living proof that evolution isn't about reaching some final state of perfection. It's about having the courage to adapt, to change, to become something new." Aurora stirred in her sleep, her luminescence brightening momentarily. In that soft glow, they could see their future, not just as parents or as representatives of their species, but as pioneers of a new way of thinking about what it meant to be perfect. Perfect wasn't about purity anymore. Perfect was about possibility.